building something from zero that has never existed before is so freaking hard. Like here and here, as much as it is in the kind of like hard skills and tactics that we often talk about when we're, advising new early stage founders and talking about this work. So I don't know exactly where that comes from, but I just noticed that on every team that I was on, like that was consistently the role that I found myself playing. And I was much more interested in finding people who were vastly smarter than me and more experienced than me and pulling them into that mission and helping them be successful than I was interested in being the smartest person in the room.
Hey everyone, welcome to Leadership Rounds, a podcast shining a spotlight on exceptional clinician executives thriving and driving innovation at the intersection of business and healthcare. I'm your host, Dr. Reena Pande, and together we'll explore the wisdom and insights of great healthcare executives and craft a prescription for leadership success, one candid conversation at a time.
So, Rebecca, I am so thrilled to have you on the podcast. We've been waiting for this moment for a little while, and I'm thrilled we got it on the schedule. As you know, this is a little project of mine where I get a chance to bring on fabulous physician and clinician leaders who have really done this really challenging thing of being able to balance and navigate both clinical and business and product and tech. And it's a really special group of people. And I'm just having so much fun spotlighting great people like you who have really made it work. So I appreciate you, and I'm glad you were able to join.
Oh, so glad to be here. And I'd call it more than a project. It's really a movement now that you're at the head of. So
I think so. And one of the heads of, maybe, as as we'll get to. You've certainly been part of this as well. So I would love to start with letting you tell your origin story. You have one of the more interesting and unique arcs of getting from medical school to where you are today. And it's really unique, I think, to finish medical school and make the decision that you're going to leap into product development,
Sure. So to talk about that moment and the leap, I have to go way back to the beginning, whether you like it or not. And I grew up in a quite rural part of the United States, northern Wisconsin, had all the cliches of, the challenges of rural healthcare delivery, hospitals shutting down, long subspecialty wait lists. We also had a large, large portion of our community was made up of kind of Hmong immigrants and refugees, actually is the more appropriate word. Both of my parents are in healthcare and social services in some way. Mom was an RN, public health nurse and school nurse. Father worked for the state. And so I was just surrounded my entire childhood, not just by the lived reality of so many people who could not access care at all sometimes, much less really high quality care. Also surrounded by a family that was constantly talking about it and trying to come up with creative ways of bridging that chasm. And it wasn't through tech back then, but a lot of other really, really incredible things I saw my parents try, and some succeeded, some didn't. And, it was really from that place that I became interested in technology a decade plus later, as being the really important lever in my lifetime and in my career to bridge a similar gap, which I learned, unfortunately, over that decade did not only exist in rural America, but sadly exist in urban settings, exist everywhere around the world. I've worked in global health for about 5 years, where, of course, anybody who has knows it's even more acute in some of those places. So I had the good fortune, even as a pre-medical student, to encounter the magic that can happen when you bring together a diverse group of people. And in this particular conversation, I mean diverse in terms of their experiences and their unique kind of functional skill sets. And you aim them all at the same problem. And people approach the problem together with humility for what they don't know and trust in what the other unique individual at the table does, and the level of creative, collaborative, healthy disruption that can take place. One experience in particular, I was, young total PN on the team, research kind of fellow on this LifeWrap project at UC San Francisco, and in particular, a nurse midwife there was spearheading, called the LifeWrap project. Has a much longer scientific name, but you can still find it. And they had really taken an approach used by NASA for astronauts that were losing blood in space, or otherwise for other reasons going to hypovolemic shock, and had taken that, paired it with material scientists, nurses, on-the-ground clinicians, UCSF researchers, and had come up with a solution that is, now, years later, after a lot of research and refining what it was together in that, complex, interesting team, on the WHO list of essential medicines. And it's saved many, many lives around the globe in some of the most remote, resource-limited places on the planet. And the important part of the story is not just the diversity of that team that was able to come up with something like this and then figure out how to get distribution when, not clear how to get it paid for, which is often the problem, right, in our industry. It was really also that they didn't go at the problem in the most obvious way, which is let's just try to train more physicians and nurses and build more hospitals for these environments and for these communities. It was, let's be real about the context that they're living in, what people will accept, what they won't accept, what they're going to experience when they move into a tertiary center, right after we apply this sort of garment. And this was before I had any of the words to call that work, product leadership, human-centered design, any of these things. But that is what that team was doing. And I directly observed the impact in terms of women literally being resuscitated from the edge of death, right? And instead able to be stabilized and treated and go back to their family. So it was really that experience as a child, and then being a small member of this incredible, highly impactful team that led me to be so interested in doing this kind of work with my career. Yeah.
I love that. I mean, you can see in that story so clearly the threads of product, right? It's really tapping into the expertise of so many different individuals around you and cinching up all that they bring, and thinking from a patient-first vantage point. What did you know about yourself, though, that led you to go in that direction, right? Because I could see someone observing that experience and saying, okay, well, I'm still going to go be the clinical expert alone versus being the one to draw on the expertise of everyone, including clinicians around the table, to build great products to meet clinical needs.
So, look, I'd say, so many people who've taken a contrarian, if not even more radical path, right, that you highlight on these shows, I think you can create an explanation looking backwards for why things happen in a certain way.
And I fell ass backwards into it, is the reality.
Let's be real. I was in my late 20s, early 30s when I made a lot of these major transition decisions. And so, a lot of it was just what people coach people to do. It's where do you find energy? Where are you uniquely skilled? What is the place and time that you are working within, existing within? And for me, what I have always been the most uniquely skilled at, which unfortunately does not fit into a clear, functional box, right? Is pulling together, finding the right people, getting them onto a team, and having a shared vision and objective. And then the reality of whether you are a CEO or a product leader or somebody launching even just a small new project, right, out of an existing big organization, so much of what is necessary in those contexts is showing up every day and bringing the energy and the optimism and the positivity to the team to keep going. Because building something from zero that has never existed before is so freaking hard, here and here, as much as it is in the kind of hard skills and tactics that we often talk about when we're, advising new early stage founders and talking about this work. So, I mean, I don't know exactly where that comes from, but I just noticed that on every team that I was on, that was consistently the role that I found myself playing. And I was much more interested in finding people who were vastly smarter than me and more experienced than me and pulling them into that mission and helping them be successful than I was interested in being the smartest person in the room, kind of telling people what we
Love it.
should do.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And if you'd asked me to, if I'd asked myself the question, what did I see in myself that got me from the Brigham and academia to able to in the early days? I'm not sure there was a storyline back then. I can see it now, only in hindsight, right?
Benjamin Button, right? They're like the life makes sense looking backwards cliche, like quote.
Yes, right. But it's like, oh, I was willing to take risk. I was willing to roll my sleeves up. I was willing to do whatever was needed in service of the mission, right? I don't think I could have articulated those things back then, so it's probably not fair to ask you the same questions that I.
That's the way. It's good to like try to explain it. Yeah,
but you are tapping into some of the features that you can, in hindsight, see in yourself, right? This willingness to not necessarily be the smartest person in the room, but to bringing together of other people is very much kind of a product-y mindset, and tapping into the expertise of everyone else around you in spirit, in service of a common mission and outcome and goal, which is so cool. I mean, so I recently spoke with Carolyn Jasek on this same podcast, and she's another unique one who has sat at the intersection of clinical and product, but from the CMO seat, the Chief Medical Officer seat. You are particularly unique, sitting at that intersection, but from the Chief Product Officer seat. So, I mean, I would just love to hear more about what that experience was really like for you in your early days. And, what were the unique advantages, but also maybe challenges of being a physician sitting in the CPO or Chief Product Officer role?
Yeah. Well, I would say, luckily, there are more of the Rebeccas now. And people, again, like I want to see smarter and more experienced people kind of taking this path. And, that I am or was. So I'm so excited by that trend. And again, I'll use the term movement, very much as a movement. Mm-hmm. And things have evolved. So I don't want to paint like a picture as if this is what all CMO positions are like, to be super clear. But at the time that I was coming into health tech, product was, generally speaking, unless you were the founder, product was where you had, at the end of the day, the responsibility to say, what is the product that we are selling to people are using in their day-to-day lives? How does it work? How do we position it in the market? What is the real value prop? How do we sell this? Mm-hmm. Right? And there were tons of other people involved in making, as input, making those decisions, executing on it, don't get me wrong, but in a high functioning technology organization, like that ultimate responsibility lies with you, right? Yeah. And I embraced the idea of that responsibility. I think in the kind of parable of the pig and like the chicken at breakfast, like I wanted to be the pig that was all in, right?
I don't know that. Wait. I don't know that parable, so you might have to share it.
If you think they're very simple, if you're having ham and eggs for breakfast, right, the pig gave all, the chicken contributed, but it's able to
see. I see. Got it. I love that.
I struggle to participate in things without being all in, which is very much a double-edged sword. And so if I was going to do health tech, I wanted to go beyond contributing and being told that I had to stay in a lane, right? Like I'd already kind of transitioned from, kind of traditional medicine, right? And been told by a lot of people that I was getting out of that traditional lane way too fast and in a weird, radical way. So coming into tech, I had no interest in being told by that community that I had to stay in a certain lane. Yeah. And again, this is changing. I think there's all kinds of like CMOs now that are far more diverse. Some actually own products, some own ops. It's super, super exciting. But at the time, that was not really the case.
Sure.
And so, but that transition was really hard because there were a lot of biases. There continue to be a lot of biases. I know we've talked about some of the things people will share with me behind closed doors, even about Scrub Capital, which we can certainly talk more about. And I don't know, it's the most absurd concept to me for somebody to suggest that a clinician, not just physicians, but any clinician is going to be on this high velocity, like learning trajectory for a decade plus. And then we think that all of a sudden they can't learn other skill sets, right?
Totally.
But on the flip side of the coin, right, you need to have humility. Like they are real skill sets, both subject matter expertise and the actual muscle of practicing those skill sets. So for me, because of that, I was comfortable they were in product, but very like clinical product, clinical features, like tools for the clinical team to use sort of roles for some period of time while I built out that muscle.
Yes.
And then really the bigger opportunities came, like, I think just because honestly, I was kind of annoying. I was like, well, but the sales team's saying this, and like the data about the patients is saying this. And it was just very clear. Like I was thinking about the totality of the problem at a different level, and was fortunate enough to be in a company that was growing really fast and successfully at the same time. And when you're in that sort of rocket ship place at the same time, all kinds of opportunities become available to you. And so when they did, huge props to Mark Kendall, who's not a physician or clinician himself. Like he saw that I was absolutely ready for that and the right person on the team to like sit in that seat. And so I grabbed it.
So great. What do you think then, like having a clinical background and having gone to med school and kind of having seen not just the book, medical knowledge, but also from your clinical rotations, like how do you think that experience actually helped your product experience? What did you take from that? And maybe just in the like day-to-day of how you ran the team even, but also how you thought about outcomes and the goals you were trying to identify and achieve.
Yeah. Look, I mean, I'd say when I went to medical school, as a pre-med and during medical school, just in terms of what UC San Francisco offered while I was there, there was exposure to lots of things about the business of medicine. I got involved in a bunch of, tech companies in the Bay Area. And so I do want to acknowledge that I was fortunate to be in a place, both UCSF and geographically, where I was able to pick up exposure beyond, what was going on only in the hospital or only in the clinic. And it was really during those years, even when I was in clinic, right, like on rotations, I was constantly pulling in what I was seeing from the other environments. I'm like, man, like I'm seeing in these companies, like what is possible if we applied technology in XYZ way, or like, what if we, instead of taking a typical approach to this quality improvement product, like we pulled in a bit of like this sort of like user-centered design and research element, right? And used that to enlarge our toolkit, and was already experiencing how comfortably like those different approaches and tools could like sit together with clinical. And I mean, I would say like when I got into tech for a while, it wasn't that I lost all the considerations, right, about like outcomes and patients and does the workflow matter. I had a bunch of other muscles to build, but I never lost those things. And so then when those other muscles in that context was there, I never had to remember or think across all those domains. And a lot of amazing leaders, not just in healthcare. I mean, like Elon Musk himself says this all the time. He's like, look, like the most effective leaders of the future and builders are people who can really think and work across different domains, if not different industries. And I almost thought about that as my residency experience. I've never represented myself as a practicing physician, right? Like I didn't do that. I went to medical school. I do have now like almost 2 decades of experience designing, building things, bringing them to market and scaling them. That's a lot of work and experience behind me, which takes, in my opinion, years to do well, much less than build the network of other humans, right? You need to like bring people along and build teams and such, which is a huge part of the job of product or VC, right? Or any of these roles in tech. So it really is the integration of those pieces, and it always like the default always being to in every conversation, not just, oh, now we're thinking about a business problem. It's how do we solve this problem ultimately for patients and clinicians? Because that's like the origin, that's where I came from.
Totally.
In a way that can also be a viable business. There's always an and, not an or.
I love that. It actually goes all the way back to like what you observed in your preclinical days too, right? What's the problem you're trying to solve, and how do you bring people together to solve it?
I think one of the best things you can do actually is to bring in a clinician and say, like, you are responsible and accountable to both the business problem and the clinical problem. Or and, right? Like putting people in silos and then expecting them to somehow create something cohesive together is one of the biggest mistakes that are made in tech orgs.
I think that's so interesting. And it's something we've touched on before, like this idea that I think a lot of people still hold, that there's business on the one hand and there's clinical on another. And you can't have both. You can't hold both at the same time. And I think you would argue, I imagine, that actually they're all the same and that you have to think about them in a unified way. Would you agree?
I think that last piece that you just said is the important one. Like you have to think about them in a unified way if you're going to have a successful, product and business. And ultimately, like that is what you need to build, right? To like really impact patients and clinicians, individual and societal health. And so to me, that is why it's an and. I think it's really, really problematic, like not just in health tech, but honestly, we do this across all of health. It's even worse across all of healthcare when we like demonize the other. We're like, oh, all those admins, all those business people. Yeah. I mean, we know these people, like you can find sociopaths in any seat in the hospital, like including some of the clinical ones, but like by and large, look, like people are choosing to be in one of the most difficult industries on the planet, right? And almost all of them are there ultimately actually for the same reasons. And you need to approach it from that framework and not other individuals or teams. I think like when it comes to clinicians, like clinicians are capable of having any role in a company, right? If they're willing to put in the time to like learn it and practice it, right? And then own it.
Totally.
Also unbelievably effective if you build, the classic T-shaped teams where people have enough context about the other functions and their own area of expertise and like trust, right? To work really effectively together.
Yeah. I love that. It gets to the next thing I wanted to touch on, which is that you posted recently about this concept of the power of having multi-talented teams and really tapping into both an insider, maybe you'd call the clinician the insider, and an outsider expertise. Why do you think that combo is so critical? I mean, there's so many of these situations where, you've got someone from a completely non-healthcare background lending their expertise. How do we bring those folks in the fold, and how do we bring insider and outsider expertise together in service of building great clinical innovation?
Yeah. Well, I will own really like honestly the genesis of that. Often I post on social media when I'm like irritated or mad about something, which is why I'm not like a regular poster, because luckily I don't spend most of my time like upset. And I wrote that because in full candor, like I'm observing some unfortunate behavior emerging from our community, actually, as there are more clinicians rightfully like embracing the leadership or at least like big seat at the table reins in health tech. And that is bringing over some of the practices, some of which are appropriate, to be clear, in medicine, which is you have to have this specific profile to deserve to have this kind of seat. And I just don't believe in that fundamentally when it comes to building products, building companies, right? I think this is an incredibly individual thing. And some of the most important pieces of it are just like, a lot of the things I talked about earlier, right? Like working across teams, learning really quickly, like iterating quickly. Can you get stuff done together as a high trust, super high quality group? And in that, I've observed a lot of conversations and posts about people, again, like othering folks that didn't come out of a certain amount of like medicine at all, a certain level of training, a certain number of years of practice. Like, I hate this. Like, I will use the H word, the four-letter H word. I hate it. I think it's terrible.
So the same way maybe that we've been othered as clinician leaders, saying, well, you can't do product, or you can't be a commercial leader, or you can't be an operator. You're observing that we clinicians are now in positions of leadership and doing the same to people external to healthcare.
And to each other, actually. Also to each other, like this type of person should be in the product role or whatever role and not this type of person. So anyway, I find all of that like very unhealthy.
Yeah.
But as you pointed out, like there have been decades of the othering from the other side of the equation. And some like VCs, right, that I work with believe this still, that they would only back somebody who's like a total, newcomer to an industry looking at it with completely fresh eyes and like all of the things. Like, I don't buy into that either. And there's been some pretty ugly things said about, insiders that have the experience and have been working for change here for many years. So anyway, back to my post. Very, very strongly believe that it's when you bring that union together, whether people are brand new to the industry or not. But again, it's, if you're somebody that deeply understands the science, has like lived it at the front lines, who've worked with patients, there's magic that happens when you partner with somebody who deeply understands like what is possible at the frontier of tech. Magic happens when you partner with somebody who is just like brilliant at understanding exactly how you talk to a self-insured employer, and like not just how, but who you talk to, right? And there's like besties from that person from decades of work.
Right.
And again, this is not me saying that clinicians can't build those skills, right, and be those people. But I mean, I think we have a little like numbers problem, right? If we expect every seat in like health tech to be filled by somebody, right, that has decades of like in healthcare practice experience. And so whether we like it or not, like we have to figure out, right, how to work effectively across those groups. And it's a very different culture of like, I'm an equal and we have a shared goal than what I observe in a lot of health systems when you partner with, IT or like whatever you're calling those teams in health systems, where it's much more like, well, here's what we're going to do. Here's what we're going to build. Like, now let me hand it to you. And that's a generalization. Like there's some that have made real strides, especially in pockets of the organization, to set up more of these collaborative teams of equals. But there's still not enough. And I would argue that's one of the reasons actually we don't see more innovation coming out of health systems in the way that we do.
I think it goes back to something you said at the very beginning, which was having humility and then having trust, which I love that combination. I would probably layer in expertise, like know what you're good at, know what you're not good at, right? Yeah. Be humble enough to know what you're not good at, and then trust that there are other experts around the table who bring something that you can learn from, and that the combination of you and others is actually the magic that can advance us forward.
Yeah. I would add to that, and as an industry, all of us, humility that most of us don't really understand what has happened in prior companies and efforts that did or did not work.
Yeah.
I think, now that I've been like part of this for, 15 to 20 years, been through several cycles. I don't know how like that happens so fast. But, Reena, I don't know how you feel about, Able to and the companies that you've been involved with, but I often hear people making like diagnoses about what did and didn't work at startups that I've been part of, particularly like Livongo, right? Because that one was such a huge like success and then merger kind of mess, right? And then what's happened in the public market since. And I'll tell you, 90% of it is wrong. Like both wrong in terms of what really went right, but also wrong in terms of like the mistakes that were made, as well as how like the macro impacted things. So I'd also say like humility for insiders, not only insiders that are inside like the house of medicine, but also insiders that have been in this industry for some time. Like I just feel that there's so much to still learn from each other, like in the real weeds, that is still so relevant in 2025.
We probably need better like morbidity and mortality conferences for companies, right? Like there should be an M&M after every, after whatever, every company's acquired or, dismantled or what have you, right? That we go back and go, what went well, what didn't go well. And
you can find it in like the private Slack communities, right? Like the operators will talk to each other about the real. It's more what you see ending up in like media articles and 100%. Social media. And there's all kinds of reasons for that. So
never the full story.
More public, honest. Yes.
Yes. Well, we should definitely turn the conversation to Scrub Capital. You mentioned venture a little bit in there, and I think you're actually probably the first clinician leader in venture that I have spoken to for this podcast.
Really?
Yeah, and there aren't a ton of you. They're increasing numbers, but still not a huge number. So it's pretty cool to have you on. I'd love for you to just tell the story of Scrub and how it came to be and what the premise is for folks who don't know about it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, high level, Scrub Capital, we're an early stage venture capital firm. We're traditional in the sense we'll write a single check onto your cap table, right? Like we have an investment committee, we have LPs, like all those traditional pieces of VC. What is very different and not traditional is that we deeply believe that we are going to pick companies better and we are going to be more effective at supporting them, especially in the earliest days, if we could put together a community of people who have been in the trenches for some time. Whether, and most of the group are people who share an identity of being a practicing clinician, either currently or very recently. We also have a really strong segment of the group heavily overlapping with the clinicians of people who've been building and leading these startups over the last several vintages. And very simply, they make up the majority of our investor base that have put pooled capital right behind the fund. And a large number of them, sometimes up to 50, are involved in every serious evaluation of an investment opportunity that we run through. And, what turns out that when you give people a lot of insight into how a firm is making decisions, like real influence, right, and what gets invested into, they get bought in into what the firm is, investing in. And they want to be helpful after you write the check because ultimately they believe in this as a lever for change in this industry and career, right, that they're dedicated to over the long haul. Everything from, we can help people put together medical advisory boards, like help you fill your product role, your new CMO role, coming in and weighing in on care models, if not larger product models, really early. On like all the more traditional things that VC firms do as well. And often people have this belief about Scrub that we're people who only, again, it's like the bias about like your lane, only understand medicine. And you look at, Reena, I know you're in the community, so you can look around and see it, right? It's people like yourself who absolutely understand the business side. Like we have other people who've been in product roles, people who've worked in every single market segment you could sell into. And our portfolio, reflects that diversity. The thing that we are, we believe in this model clearly, myself, Christina Farr, and John Slotkin, the two other co-founders and GPs. What has been so beautiful is how quickly founders have bought into the model, right? Because ultimately, the way that you're going to be successful as a firm is the best founders and companies really wanting to partner with you, right? And seeing you as more than just another source of capital, especially when you're, a fund one out there with a contrarian, again, like kind of radical new model. And man, Reena, it's so cool. Like they get it. Like almost from day one, like when founders hear about Scrub, they're like, this is a no-brainer, like to take a single check and to be able to hear the perspectives of people that like are at the heart of medicine and whom are builders just like me. That is exactly who I want in a capital partner. Not only people that have been writing checks.
So a couple of questions. One is the thesis. To me, I believe the thesis, and at full disclosure, I am an LP in Scrub, as someone who truly believes in this mission, and I'm part of the community as well, as you just alluded to. I'm also like deeply outcomes and data driven as you are, right? So was there data and proof before you guys engaged in this, in building the firm, that investing in, clinician-led businesses and bringing together clinicians as LPs and as advisors and thought partners would have an ROI? And if there wasn't, and there was just theory, which I believe is also good.
What did you
Yeah, no, exactly. But has that proven out too? I know it's still early days, and there's probably not been enough time, in all fairness, to see that thesis play out. But would love to hear a little bit about the data points behind it.
Yeah. So like so many, we think about Scrub as a startup as much as we do a fund, right? We really had to think about like, where is there a gap in the market? Like, what are the indicators that if we filled this gap, we could be successful, and why? So, there isn't another firm like this, particularly in healthcare. There's some others that have put together things like the Operators Collective, Emerson Collective. I call them kind of comps for other industries. They also haven't been around forever, although do have more data, at least in terms of their ability to get into really, really high quality deals and to keep a larger community like that engaged. So we like that as like a leading, indicator. I would say though, to your specific question for Scrub, here's what we have observed that gave us conviction, not just that could we bring in people of this kind of type and would they want to stay, would they want to help? Like we already believed that from our own conversations in these other models. Do we believe ultimately we will be better at picking and we'll be better at helping the companies? Our conviction there comes from correlation, not causation, and seeing that actually a lot of the top firms now have, particularly physicians, I would say, somewhere on their investment committee or in a really key like venture partner with tons of impact and influence sort of seat. Lightspeed has this, like Interwest has this, Andreessen has this. Mm-hmm. They are out there, right? And what I've observed is actually increasingly those individuals at those large funds are becoming a huge portion of the voice and the outward personality. And increasingly I'm hearing driving strategy, like for what they invest in and what they don't invest in. So that's quite interesting to me, right? If you're a fund that has infinite kind of capital to throw at the problem, they're making these choices, right? Bringing in these clinician polymaths and putting them into these incredibly powerful seats. We also have some data. I wouldn't say, again, like I wouldn't do an RCT, or like publish around it, but we have like internal white paper data looking at companies that have exited into the public markets or have had particularly large M&As over the last 2 vintages. And consistently you see that they had a clinician founder, co-founder, or in another like really critical leadership seat. Again, like was Love that great leader seeing that it was important in bringing people in? Or was it causal? We don't know, right? But for sure, the signal is there.
Absolutely.
And then I'd say for John, Chrissy, and I, like our own lived experience was how much all of the work that we've done in this industry has been accelerated when we would partner, right, with these like clinician and builder insiders. And we heard the same thing from some of the best founders, right? So lots of good leading indicators that it will work, but definitely stay tuned, fund over fund, as you will, as an LP for the real.
I certainly believe it. And I think your observation is right, that it's so interesting that some of these big firms now, you mentioned Lightspeed, Town Hall, Andreessen, Flair, right? There are physicians in positions of decision-making authority, which is really, really cool to see. And I, of course, completely believe this thesis, which is A, why I'm an LP, and B, why I sit on this side of the house trying to put great talent into leadership positions, because I also am a strong believer, right, that not just chief medical officers, but whether they're commercial leaders or product leaders or growth leaders or what have you, or CEOs, having that clinician voice at the executive table that can marry, as we said at the beginning, business and tech and product and clinical all together is incredibly powerful. And there's still a lot of bias around it, and still a lot of times where I have to convince people that that's true. But I think the more times we're knocking on the door and standing on our soapbox, the better it will be.
You find that it's individual people that often create the best examples and convince people to think differently. I mean, look, like I have to have these conversations all the time with potential new LPs in Scrub, and I would say, unless they are a clinician themselves, sometimes I get this, but more often from our other kind of like more traditional LP types, all kinds of questions about this, right? But when I hold up specific people, yourself is a great example, Jenny Schneider, who was like president at Livongo, like the IPO and the M&A, like, and this whole like Sachin Jain, like this whole host of people, it's always like, oh, well, I don't mean them. Like at some point, there's just too many I don't mean them us now out of their mouth. And it's like, oh, you're right. Like we actually do have now this like many hundred, if not like thousands of individuals, right, that have built these cross-domain expertise and been real leaders in other places in the industry. I think there's like a huge turning point that has occurred.
I completely agree. And you no longer have to do what they did with me, which is pluck someone out of academia and kind of hope and pray that you've got the DNA to...
You did just fine.
Make it. I did just fine, indeed. But now we have people who've actually seen the movie play before and who actually have existing expertise that you can tap into, which is cool. Which gets me to maybe the last topic before we run out of time here, which is to talk about the community. Scrub Collaborative, which was formerly, right, Clinicians Who VC. And I can hear in how you're talking about Scrub, the importance of the LP base that, you guys as GPs, the companies you're investing in, and then this community of people and surround. How have you guys thought about that? And what have you seen? How have you used it? We've heard a little of that, but what are people seeking? What are our clinician peers looking for in tapping into that community? And where are the gaps and how might we continue to support them? That's a lot of questions in one, but
I love this. The community is at the heart of the community, and like the founders' portfolio companies, they're the heart of everything that we do. So, first I will just share, Scrub has a fund. The larger firm though really has a dual mission. It's the fund piece. We want to back and support like the best companies that are going to have not only great financial returns, but a huge impact on our industry and individual and societal health. We also very much believe in these emerging or existing clinician kind of humble polymath builder leaders but we really believe those are the individuals that should be in the seats of power, and their voices need to be amplified. They need to be armed with additional skills, and they need to see sort of all the opportunities that the industry can afford them and more, because there should be more. And so a lot of the work that we do as a firm is thinking about, even in early days, Fund One, how can we, assemble people who are going to be as inspired by and learn from each other. And, as you probably experienced, the community is quite diverse, right? They come out of all different specialties. It's not just physicians, it's RNs, NPs, pharmacists, PT, OT, dentists, right? We want the whole care team around the table. Believe that's really important. There's people in the community who've been doing this for decades now, and they are some of the most radical early believers and embracers of tech and substantial change that it could bring about in the healthcare industry. Then there's people that are, fairly new to doing this kind of work, but we believe are approaching it with that, endless learners, and humble kind of mentality that we believe are going to be incredibly successful in making this career transition, but incorporating this right into their portfolio in terms of their career. So, and a lot of it's not only bringing them together, but incorporating them into our investment processes, right? Anything that passes a GP screen, this group is invited into what we call our community pitch. And if you want to, you can be spending 2+ hours per week, sitting in the same virtual room with a founder, bearing all of the things about their company, right? And really getting peppered with some pretty difficult questions from this group, not just on clinical, but on, product, go-to-market, long-term distribution, moat, where is technology going in the industry? And it is both an opportunity to influence, right, whether we write the check or not. But what we hear consistently is that this is a really high quality, unmatched opportunity to really understand what's happening at the bleeding edge of the industry, because it's not filtered by marketing or a sales process or what your institution says you can use or can't use. You see, the inner workings of the company, particularly if you follow it through the whole diligence process. And for people who are not used to thinking about something beyond its clinical utility, you build muscle in how to evaluate something as a business, different stages, and how to evaluate something as an investment, which is different from whether or not it's a good business. And people learn a lot about actually where we have kind of even funding gaps in our industry right now to back certain kinds of companies versus others, which could be a whole separate podcast, I know. And then we do a lot of virtual and in-person events that are building really specific skills, whether it's skills relevant for somebody who's expanding their portfolio of ability beyond clinical practice into other areas, whether product or something else like ops, or people that just want to build more muscle and thinking about early stage investing as an angel, or maybe they aspire to start their own fund someday, right, or work somewhere. And all of those things, unsurprisingly, right, they're not only things that the community really is looking for, right? Based upon the user research and kind of surveys we've done, and we get great feedback on it. It is also incredibly beneficial to us as a firm
Sure.
of course, because the more engaged and kind of more educated people are on thinking across these domains, the more effective they're going to be, not only at helping us pick, but at helping the company. So it's like very intentionally set up as this sort of strategic flywheel between different arms of the organization.
I love it. Like we could talk forever and ever probably about dig deep on any of these topics. I think I'll just end with I feel it, and I think you feel it too, this responsibility as maybe the seniors in the room in the high school, right? Or the attendings in the CCU, if you will, to lift up and bring along those clinician leaders coming up behind us. And yeah, I just wonder if you have some closing thoughts on what you would say to all of those folks, right, as they're contemplating at the early stage, jumping into this world, or later on, like how to navigate it. Any one? There's probably no one. It's not fair for me to.
There's no one.
Oh, I feel bad asking the question. Any one final tidbit of advice or something you wish you had known or been told?
I mean, I think I will say two things, actually. Sorry, I can keep it to one.
Two's good. I'll give you two.
As much as you may hear, hopefully you won't, definitely, you may hear some biased comments and assumptions about your abilities. There's a huge number of people now that believe in you, and they know that they need you, right? Coming directly out of, even if you're directly out of residency, medical school, if you've only ever, you've dedicated your career to date to practicing, you already have so many skills and experiences that are truly vital to businesses, to VCs, whatever you decide to do. There's so many opportunities in doing it, a very small percentage of your time or doing it over a large percentage of your time, right? It is, in my opinion, never a better time than now to start getting involved. There's so much demand, so much need, and people get it. Two, and this is maybe the little more contrarian statement that I make.
Go for it.
Look, I believe this since I was in medical school, thinking about it for myself. I think right now this work, maybe it's not seen as radical anymore, right? Luckily those days have sort of passed, but it's still not the norm, right? And the clarity and exactly how you walk down this path is still it's still emerging.
We're still figuring it out.
Right. But I believe that this is the beginning of what we will consider practicing at the top of our license as clinicians of any sort, but especially physicians, right? We're trained to be scientists. Moving forward, as we enter meaningfully into this age of human plus machine and how we care for people and society, I believe that if you embrace this now, you are unquestionably set up to be the clinical leaders and the business leaders of the future, because all of us are going to be practicing in this way in some way or the other.
For sure. I appreciate that. Well, with that, like I said, we could probably talk for hours and hours, but I so appreciate you joining me. Your story is so unique. Hopefully will be less unique as time passes and more people take the great advice you're offering, and think about creative and different ways to contribute to healthcare and tech innovation. Just so grateful to hear your story and to hear about Scrub, and grateful to be part of it, and hope to see the success, and selfishly to get to reap some of the benefits from that. But I just appreciate the opportunity to really spotlight such a unique clinician leader role in the healthcare universe. So thank you for joining.
Happy to be here. Thanks for that.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Leadership Rounds, where clinician executives share wisdom and insights on what it means to be an exceptional leader in healthcare. If you enjoyed today's discussion, please subscribe, comment, and share with your friends and fellow leaders in healthcare. Join us next time for another dose of leadership wisdom. Until then, I'm Dr. Reena Pande. Thanks for listening.